The squirrel family's great journey. Deep in the heart of the great oak forest, beneath a thick canopy of rustling leaves, a world both seen and unseen was always at work. The towering trees, their trunks stretching high into the sky, shared the earth with creatures big and small. Squirrels leaping from branch to branch, rabbits burrowing into the soft ground, and birds calling to one another from above. But beneath the surface, hidden in the damp earth, another world thrived, one that very few ever noticed. This was the world of the fungi. Fungi were not like plants, nor were they like animals. They did not drink sunshine the way the leaves did, nor did they scamper through the underbrush as the foxes did. Instead, they grew in secret, their thin, thread-like roots, called mycelium, spreading like an underground web, weaving between the roots of trees, whispering messages through the soil. Some fungi were friends of the forest. They helped trees share food, carrying nutrients from the oldest, strongest oaks to the youngest saplings just beginning to stretch toward the sky. Others broke down fallen leaves and rotting logs, turning them into rich, dark soil. These fungi were the caretakers, the quiet helpers that kept the forest alive. But not all fungi were kind. There were some fungi, silent, creeping invaders, that fed on life instead of nourishing it. They clung to the bark of trees like pale, ghostly lace, sinking their filaments deep into the wood. Slowly they drained the trees of their strength, causing the branches to sag and the leaves to wither before their time. At first the trees fought back, sealing their bark against the unwelcome guest. But the fungus was patient. It crept in little by little, moving from tree to tree, until whole patches of the forest began to change. The air smelled damp and sickly sweet. The once sturdy oaks, homes to so many creatures, started to weaken. And soon, the animals that lived in their branches, woodpeckers, chipmunks, and squirrels, would have to make a choice. For those who called the trees home, the forest had always been a safe place. The thick branches had cradled them since birth, the leaves had shielded them from the sun and rain, and the steady supply of acorns had never let them go hungry. But now, something was different. The squirrels in particular, clever, nimble, and always watching, began to sense it first. The trees no longer smelled like warm earth and fresh bark. The leaves, once crisp and full, had started to curl at the edges. Acorns fell too soon, their shells still soft and unripe. Something was wrong. And for one squirrel, a father named Henry, the truth would soon become clear. The time had come to leave. To move meant risk, uncertainty, and danger. But staying? Staying meant something even worse. Henry didn't know it yet, but he and his family were about to embark on the greatest journey of their lives. A journey that would test their courage, their friendship, and their belief in something squirrels rarely embraced: change. And so, as the morning sun filtered through the swaying branches, Henry prepared for an acorn-gathering trip that would change everything. The morning light filtered through the leaves, casting golden speckles across the inside of the squirrel family's cozy nest. A gentle breeze rustled the branches, making their home sway just enough to feel like a cradle rocking back and forth. Henry stretched his limbs, letting out a satisfied sigh as he blinked himself awake. Beside him, Linda was already stirring, her soft fur brushing against his. The warmth of their little ones, Sandy, Lindsey, and Tyler, curled in a tangled heap against them made his heart swell. Lindsey, the smallest and sleepiest, let out a tiny yawn, her paws stretching above her head before she buried her face back into Linda's fur. Tyler, of course, popped up first, always full of energy. He scrambled onto Henry's back, giggling, his fluffy tail twitching excitedly. "Wake up, wake up!" Tyler chirped. "It's morning. We have to get acorns before the blue jays take them all." Henry chuckled, reaching up to ruffle his son's fur. All right, I'm up. But the blue jays are early risers, we'll have to be fast." Sandy, ever the practical one, sat up and stretched her back, her little nose twitching as she peeked outside. "It looks like a good day for gathering. The wind didn't shake too many acorns loose last night." Lindsey, still groggy, mumbled into her mother's fur. Can't we just eat the ones we already have? Linda smiled, pressing a gentle nuzzle against Lindsey's tiny head. We have to make sure we have enough for winter, love. Henry stood up and shook out his fur, preparing for the day. I'll bring back the biggest acorns I can find. Tyler bounced up and down. Find some of the shiny ones, Dad. The golden ones taste the best. Sandy smirked. They all taste the same, Tyler. Tyler huffed. Do not. The golden ones are crunchier. Linda laughed softly, nudging Henry toward the nest opening. Go on before these three argue about acorns all morning. Henry smiled at his family, his heart full and warm. This was home. Safe, familiar, strong. He had no idea how much that was about to change. Henry climbed out of the nest and into the towering branches of their ancient oak, the crisp morning air filling his lungs. The forest around him was alive with sound. Birds singing, leaves rustling, the distant chatter of chipmunks squabbling over a nut. He set off, moving swiftly and skillfully through the branches. The sun was rising higher, bathing everything in warm gold, making the dew on the leaves sparkle. He knew all the best spots for acorns. His favorite tree, a tall bur oak with thick branches and a never-ending supply of plump golden acorns, was just a short climb away. The bark felt rough and familiar beneath his paws as he bounded effortlessly from branch to branch. Below, the ground was littered with fallen nuts, but he always preferred the ones still clinging to the branches. They were the freshest, the best. He paused when he reached a sturdy limb, his eyes scanning for the biggest prize. And then, there it was, a huge golden acorn, smooth and perfect, hanging just out of reach. Henry's whiskers twitched with excitement. Oh, that's the one. He carefully edged forward, testing the branch. It swayed slightly, but he was used to this. With a swift leap, he snatched the acorn in his paws, twisting mid-air to land gracefully back on the branch. Satisfied, he stuffed the acorn into his cheek pouch, then continued his search. This was his routine, his duty, bringing food home, keeping his family safe, being part of the rhythm of the forest. Everything felt normal, steady, right, until... Henry paused mid-step. A strange scent drifted through the air, something damp and sickly sweet, something that didn't belong. His ears twitched, his nose wrinkled, and then as he climbed down a little farther, his sharp eyes caught sight of something strange, something that sent an uneasy shiver down his spine. At the base of a nearby tree, a white fuzzy growth clung to the bark, spreading like ghostly fingers, creeping upward. Henry's breath caught. This was not normal. Something was wrong. His cozy world, so safe and familiar, was about to change forever. Henry's whiskers twitched uneasily. Then he saw it. A strange white fuzz was creeping up the bark, delicate yet menacing, like frost that had arrived too soon. But this was no frost. It clung to the tree like a sickness, stretching in ghostly veins toward the branches above. Henry reached out a cautious paw, touching the bark. It crumbled beneath his claws, soft as ash. His heart pounded. This was wrong. The trees had always been strong, their bark rough and sturdy, but now they were changing. Henry swallowed hard. He had to tell someone. Bounding through the trees with urgency, he found his friends, Tom, Bob, and Sam, huddled near a large oak, stuffing their cheeks with acorns. Come quick, Henry called, his voice unusually sharp. Tom, a chubby brown squirrel with bright, curious eyes, looked up mid-chew. What's the rush? There's plenty to... Just come, Henry insisted. The group followed him through the maze of branches, their bushy tails flicking in alarm as they caught sight of the creeping white fungus. Sam, the quietest of the four, hesitantly poked at the bark, only to pull his paw back quickly as another piece flaked away. This isn't right, he murmured. Bob, the oldest and wisest among them, let out a heavy sigh. His fur had begun to silver around the edges, and with it came memories of things the younger squirrels had never seen. I've heard of this before, he said gravely. The others turned to him, eyes wide. My grandmother told stories about a sickness like this, a fungus that spreads fast, too fast. It weakens the trees from the inside, stealing their strength until they fall apart. He took a slow breath. She said, when it comes, animals have to leave or they don't survive. A heavy silence settled over them. The forest, which had always been a place of safety and comfort, now felt fragile, like the trees could break beneath their paws at any moment. But this is our home, Tom whispered. Where would we even go? Henry's mind raced. He looked around, seeing the trees through new eyes. The ones closest to the infected oak already had curling leaves, their branches hanging limp. It was spreading, and it wouldn't stop. We have to tell the others, Henry said firmly, pushing down the rising fear in his chest. We don't have a choice. We have to move. Without another word, the 4 squirrels turned and raced back toward their nests, their hearts pounding in time with the wind that whispered through the dying trees. Henry's heart pounded as he bounded through the trees, leaping over twisting branches and brittle leaves. The wind had picked up, rattling the thinning canopy, carrying the scent of decay. The image of the crumbling bark and the ghostly white fungus haunted him with every step. He had to get home. He had to tell Linda. Their home was nestled high in an old oak, sturdy and familiar, the same tree where he and Linda had raised their 3 little ones, Sandy, Lindsey, and Tyler. As he skittered inside, breathless, Linda looked up from where she was grooming Lindsey's fur. "Henry?" she asked, instantly reading the worry in his eyes. "What's wrong?" Sandy, the eldest, perked her ears. Tyler, the smallest, bounced to his feet, his fluffy tail twitching. Lindsey, already the most anxious of the 3, clung to her mother's side. Henry swallowed hard. "I found something bad," he said, his voice low but urgent. He turned to Linda, searching her face. "It's fungus, Linda. The kind that eats trees from the inside. It's spreading, fast." A sharp silence filled the den. Lindsey's tiny paws trembled. "The tree is sick?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Henry nodded. "Not just our tree, sweetheart. A lot of them." Sandy frowned, her small face creased with worry. "Can't the trees fight back?" "Some try," Henry admitted. "But this fungus, it doesn't stop. It weakens them until they fall apart." He hesitated before saying the next words. "We can't stay here." Lindsey let out a whimper and buried her face in Linda's fur. Tyler, however, perked up, his dark eyes gleaming. "We have to leave?" "You mean? Like a big adventure?" Henry's heart ached at the contrast between his children's reactions. Lindsey's fear was raw, and Tyler's excitement, though bright, was built on the innocence of not truly understanding what they were about to face. Linda wrapped her tail protectively around them. "Where would we go, Henry?" He sighed, shaking his head. "I don't know yet, but we can't wait until it's too late. The trees are already dying." Lindsey sniffled. "But this is our home," she whispered. Henry knelt beside her, brushing a paw over her tiny head. "I know, sweetheart, I know it's scary. But home isn't just a tree, it's us together. We'll find a new place, somewhere safe." Sandy nodded slowly. "If we wait, we might not have a choice," she said, voice steady but uncertain. "I don't want to wait." Tyler bounced on his paws. "Yeah, we should go before it gets worse. I bet we'll find an even better tree." Lindsey clung tighter to her mother. "But what if we don't?" Linda nuzzled her gently. "Then we'll keep looking until we do." A quiet understanding settled over them. Change was frightening, but staying was more dangerous. Henry looked at Linda, who gave him a small, firm nod. "We'll leave at first light," he said, and just like that, their home was no longer their home. It was time to find another. The golden light of dawn filtered through the treetops as Henry, Linda, and their 3 little ones, Sandy, Lindsey, and Tyler, moved swiftly through the branches. Their old home was already fading into the distance, the memory of its warmth and safety lingering in their hearts. But there was no time for second thoughts. The fungus was creeping, and the forest they had known was no longer safe. Henry led the way, his sharp eyes scanning for danger, while Linda stayed close behind, making sure their little ones didn't fall behind. Tyler bounced excitedly from branch to branch, while Lindsey clung tightly to her mother's tail, her wide eyes darting at every rustling sound. "Stay close," Henry reminded them, his voice both gentle and firm. "We move fast and together." Tyler, the smallest but most daring, let out an excited squeak as he leapt to another branch. "This is amazing. We should travel like this all the time." Lindsey, gripping a twig tightly, shuddered. "No, we shouldn't," she muttered. They had only been moving for a short while when they came across their first encounter. The morning light filtered through the branches, casting golden beams onto the damp forest floor. The squirrel family moved swiftly, leaping from branch to branch, their tiny paws gripping the bark with precision. The air was crisp, but the weight in Henry's chest was heavy. They had left behind everything they knew, and they still had no idea what lay ahead as they climbed through a thick tangle of branches. A pile of fur shifted in the crook of an old beech tree. A family of possums lay curled together in a messy heap, their thick, scruffy coats blending into the bark. One of them, a mother possum with droopy eyes and a slow, syrupy voice, lifted her head and squinted at the squirrels. "Where are you all scurrying off to so early?" she murmured through a yawn, stretching her limbs lazily. Henry skidded to a halt, his tail twitching as he caught his breath. Linda landed beside him, keeping a protective eye on their little ones. "We're looking for a new home," Henry explained, his voice laced with exhaustion. "Our part of the forest, it's changing." The possum blinked at him, her ears twitching. "Changing, you say?" Sandy, always quick to clarify, stepped forward. "A fungus is spreading," she said, her voice steady but worried. "The trees are getting sick. We couldn't stay." The mother possum's whiskers twitched, and a knowing sigh left her lips. She sat up, her round belly shifting as she adjusted herself. "Ah," she hummed. "I've seen that fungus before." She scratched behind one ear with her hind leg, then flicked her tail. "It takes and takes, bit by bit, until there's nothing left." Lindsey squeaked and pressed herself into Linda's fur. "Nothing left?" she whispered. The possum nodded. "The trees hollow out, the bark falls like old paper, and the food disappears. Even the insects leave." Henry felt his stomach clench. He had known things were bad, but hearing it confirmed by another creature made the reality sink in deeper. "But—" The possum suddenly lifted her nose, sniffing the air. She turned toward the horizon, where the first golden streaks of sunlight filtered through the leaves. "Head east." "East?" Linda asked, her tail curling protectively around Lindsey. The possum's mother nodded slowly. "The trees are strong there. I don't know why, but the fungus hasn't touched that land yet." She yawned again, already sinking back into her family's warm pile of fur. "Might be your best chance." Henry met Linda's gaze, and she gave him a small but decisive nod. Linda dipped her head respectfully. "Thank you." The possums barely responded, already drifting back to sleep, their tails draped lazily over one another. Henry took a deep breath and turned to his family. "You heard her. We head east." Tyler, always eager, bounced in place. Finally, a real direction. "Let's go." With renewed urgency, the squirrel family pressed on, climbing higher, moving faster. The sun was rising, and for the first time in a long time, they had hope. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden beams through the thickening trees. Shadows stretched across the forest floor, and the once vibrant greens of the leaves had deepened into hues of twilight blue. The air was cooler now, heavier, and with it came a new scent, something unfamiliar, untamed. Henry could feel the weight of exhaustion creeping into his limbs. They had traveled far too far since leaving their home, and the strain was starting to show. Linda's steps had slowed, and Sandy kept rubbing her tired eyes. Even Tyler, who had been nothing but excited all day, was less bouncy now, his tiny paws dragging slightly with each leap. Lindsey, however, was the most affected. She clung tightly to Linda's tail, her small face filled with fear every time the wind shifted the branches. "Where are we going to sleep?" she finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. Henry slowed his pace, scanning the dense foliage ahead. They needed a safe place, somewhere hidden, warm, high enough to keep them away from prowling foxes, but sturdy enough to hold them all. A gust of wind whistled through the branches, and Henry felt the hairs on his back rise. The deeper they traveled, the wilder the forest seemed to become. It wasn't just the physical dangers, it was the unknown. Every creaking branch sounded too much like a lurking predator. Every rustling leaf could be a silent wing in the darkness. They weren't home anymore. Then, as the last golden light slipped below the horizon, Henry spotted it, a towering maple, its trunk twisted with age, its branches thick and welcoming. But more importantly, a hollow lay nestled in its sturdy arms, a perfect little burrow hidden within the trunk itself. "There," Henry said, his voice firm but gentle. "That'll keep us safe for the night." Linda looked up, her sharp eyes scanning the spot before nodding. "Good choice." One by one, they climbed toward the opening, their paws aching but determined. As they reached the hollow, Henry sniffed cautiously. No fresh sense of predators, no sign of another creature claiming the space. It was empty, safe, and warm. The walls of the hollow were lined with soft, decaying wood, its scent rich with age. The space was just big enough for them to curl up together, their bodies pressing into one another, sharing warmth. As soon as they settled inside, the tension in their bodies softened. Tyler immediately curled into the softest spot, sighing dramatically. "This is the best bed ever." Sandy nestled beside him, her tail draped over his tiny body like a blanket. "It's a bed for survivors," she murmured sleepily. Lindsey, however, was still alert, her little ears twitching at every distant sound. "What if something finds us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Linda pulled her close, tucking Lindsey's small head beneath her chin. "Then we stay quiet and still, and it will pass us by." Henry positioned himself at the hollow's entrance, keeping watch. His ears perked for any sign of danger. The wind moved through the trees, shifting the leaves like an ancient lullaby. It was different from the comforting noises of home, but it wasn't entirely unfriendly. It was new. As his family's breathing slowed into sleep, Henry kept his eyes open just a little longer. The stars above twinkled through the branches, and for the first time he let himself wonder, what would tomorrow bring? The forest thickened as Henry and his family moved deeper into the unknown. The towering trees grew closer together, their twisting branches forming a dense canopy that let in only slivers of golden light. The air smelled richer here, damp earth, crisp leaves, and something else, something musky and wild. Henry's ears twitched, they weren't alone. A rustling came from below, followed by the faintest tremor of movement in the underbrush. Henry signaled for his family to stop. Linda pulled Lindsey close, while Sandy and Tyler peered curiously over the branch. Nestled in the roots of an ancient oak, a family of rabbits huddled together, their soft brown fur blending into the earth. Their ears flicked anxiously at every whisper of wind, and their pink noses quivered, sniffing for unseen threats. One of them, a sturdy-looking rabbit with wise, dark eyes, stood up on his hind legs, scanning the treetops before locking eyes with Henry. "Careful, travelers," the rabbit murmured, his voice barely louder than the breeze. "Danger waits ahead." A chill ran through Henry's fur. He stepped forward cautiously. What kind of danger? The rabbit flicked his ears toward the tangled shadows beyond them. The wind shifted, carrying an ominous silence. "Foxes prowl the underbrush," the rabbit whispered. "Hawks circle above. Snakes slither through the leaves." His voice was laced with experience, as if he had seen many creatures vanish into those very shadows. The wild woods are no safe place for small creatures. Lindsey let out a tiny squeak and buried herself against Linda's side, her whole body trembling. Foxes, hawks, snakes, she echoed, her voice barely above a breath. Tyler, however, perked up instantly, his tail fluffing with excitement. Foxes, hawks, snakes, his eyes gleamed with pure thrill. This just got even better. Sandy rolled her eyes. You have a strange idea of fun, Tyler. Linda sighed, nudging Tyler gently forward. Let's keep moving. Henry gave the rabbit a grateful nod. Thank you for the warning. The rabbit only twitched his nose in reply, his deep brown eyes filled with something that looked almost like sorrow. Stay on the high branches, he murmured, and don't linger when the wind is still. Henry's fur bristled at the eerie advice, but he gave a curt nod before leading his family forward. As they leapt into the trees once more, Lindsey glanced nervously over her shoulder at the rabbits, now barely visible in the shadows of the old oak. And then, just before the trees swallowed them up again, she saw it. A single set of golden eyes gleaming from the darkness of the underbrush, watching, waiting. Lindsey shuddered and squeezed her mother's paw tighter. The wild woods were awake. The journey stretched on, the once crisp morning giving way to the blazing heat of midday. The sun climbed higher, its golden rays piercing through the thick canopy, casting long dancing shadows across the forest floor. The air grew heavy, filled with the mingling scents of damp bark, wildflowers, and the distant murmur of a bubbling creek. Henry's legs burned with exhaustion, and the little ones were beginning to lag behind. Lindsey, panting, trudged forward with her ears drooping, while Sandy rubbed at her grumbling belly. Even Tyler, normally a boundless ball of energy, had lost his enthusiasm, his leaps becoming sluggish, his usual chatter replaced by a grumpy sigh. Then a scent drifted through the air. Nutty, sweet, familiar. Linda's nose twitched. Do you smell that? Sandy perked up. Food? Following the scent, they came upon a gnarled old oak, its twisted roots gripping the earth like ancient fingers. A hollow at its base yawned open like a secret doorway, and from inside, a flurry of movement caught Henry's eye. A family of mice, small, velvety brown and quick-footed, scurried about, sorting seeds into tiny piles. In the center of them stood an elder mouse, her fur soft and silvery, her dark eyes filled with warmth and knowing. She looked up as the squirrels approached, her whiskers twitching in amusement. Hungry travelers should never go on empty stomachs, the old mouse said, her voice gentle as wind through wheat fields. She lifted her tiny paws, revealing a bundle of seeds and dried berries, carefully gathered and tied together with woven blades of grass. Henry hesitated. It wasn't often that food was simply offered. In the wild, every morsel was earned, every bite a treasure. But there was something in the old mouse's gaze, something kind, something steady, that made him feel safe, even if only for a moment. Linda offered a grateful smile. That's very kind of you. The elder mouse nodded knowingly, her eyes twinkling. Kindness is lighter to carry than fear. They sat together beneath the shelter of the great oak's outstretched roots, the squirrels nibbling at the simple meal, savoring each bite. The berries burst with sweetness, the seeds were crunchy and rich, filling the hollow ache in their stomachs. For just a moment, everything felt normal. The forest hummed softly, the leaves swaying in a rhythm older than time. The distant chirp of crickets, the rustle of wings, the occasional drop of water sliding off a leaf. It was a lullaby, a whisper of peace in a world so full of motion. Henry let himself breathe, really breathe. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of his family beside him, the security of the earth beneath him. Maybe they would be okay. And then, a shadow streaked across the ground. The moment froze. The mice went silent, their tiny bodies stiff as stone. Linda's ears flicked toward the treetops, her breath catching. Henry snapped his eyes open just in time to see it, a massive black-winged shape cutting across the sun. A hawk. A piercing screech tore through the silence, and suddenly the peaceful forest became a battlefield of motion. Into the hollow! The elder mouse barked, rushing to usher her family inside. Henry's heart slammed against his ribs. He lunged for Tyler, grabbing him by the scruff, just as the wind from the hawk's wings ruffled the fur on his back. The world exploded into chaos. Lindsey let out a terrified squeal as Linda wrapped her tail around her, dragging her toward the nearest branch. Sandy scrambled backward, her fur puffed to twice its size. The hawk's shadow loomed closer, its deadly talons outstretched. Henry acted on instinct. He kicked off the ground, leaping higher, higher, his paws burning with effort as he reached for a branch. Just as the hawk's claws sliced through the air where he had just stood, a gust of wind roared past him as the great bird circled back, its sharp eyes locking onto them once more. The meal was over. The fight for survival had begun. The forest had grown too quiet. The usual symphony of chirping birds and rustling leaves had dimmed, replaced by an eerie stillness. The squirrels moved carefully through the branches, their ears flicking at every sound, their nervous energy crackling like dry leaves in the wind. Henry felt it first. Something was watching. Then, a whisper of movement below. A shadow shifted in the underbrush, barely more than a ripple against the golden afternoon light. A glint of amber eyes, low and calculating. A shape slinking through the ferns, smooth and silent as flowing water. Henry's breath hitched. His instinct screamed. "Fox!" he whispered sharply, his voice razor-thin but urgent. The family froze mid-step, their tails bristling. A beat of silence. Then, the world exploded. The fox lunged, a streak of red fur and white teeth, its powerful legs sending up a scatter of dirt and leaves. "Run!" Henry roared. Chaos erupted. Sandy scrambled upward, her claws digging desperately into the bark. Linda shoved Lindsey ahead, her heart pounding as she pushed her little one to safety. Tyler, ever eager, tried to jump too quickly, and slipped. A terrified squeak escaped him as his hind legs scraped against empty air, his tiny body dangling precariously from a thin branch. Below, the fox snapped its jaws so close, Tyler could feel the rush of breath against his fur. Henry moved without thinking. He leapt, grabbing Tyler by the scruff, yanking him up just as the fox sprang again, its claws raking the air where Tyler had been only moments before. The fox landed hard, its claws skidding against the rough tree bark. It snarled, golden eyes blazing, tail lashing furiously as it prowled beneath them, circling like a flame around dry wood. Above, Henry pulled Tyler close, feeling his son's tiny heart hammering against his chest. For a long moment, no one moved. The fox paced below, growling in frustration, its ears flicking toward their every movement. But after a while it realized there would be no easy meal here today. With a final snort, the fox turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest, its predator's patience endless. The danger was gone, but Henry knew it would be back. Panting, Tyler clung to his father's fur, his tiny paws gripping tighter than ever before. "Okay," he gasped, his voice shaky but trying to sound brave. That wasn't fun. Linda pulled Lindsey into a hug, nuzzling her trembling daughter. Sandy let out a slow breath, her tail still puffed up like a thistle. Henry finally exhaled, his grip on Tyler loosening just enough to set him down gently on the branch. "No," Henry murmured, scanning the trees, his heart still hammering in his chest. It wasn't. But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant call of an owl. The squirrel family moved carefully, their fur still bristling from the chase. Their legs ached, their hearts pounded, but they couldn't stop yet, not until they found safety. Henry led them through the darkened trees, scanning for shelter. The fox's growl, the hawk's piercing screech, the snake's slithering hiss, all of it still echoed in his ears. They had escaped, but danger was never far. Then Linda spotted it. A fallen tree, its massive trunk resting against another, forming a small hidden alcove. Thick moss and tangled roots surrounded it, masking their scent. "There," Linda whispered, One by one they slipped inside, pressing close together in the soft, earthy hollow. The ground was cool but comforting, the scent of damp wood wrapping around them like a protective blanket. Tyler let out a long sigh. No foxes, no hawks, no snakes. No foxes, no hawks, no snakes, Sandy confirmed, her voice barely above a breath. Lindsey curled tightly against Linda, her small body finally relaxing. "I just want to sleep forever," she murmured. Henry positioned himself near the entrance, his eyes still scanning the shadows. For a long moment he stayed awake, listening. The forest hummed, softer now. Not home, but safe enough. And as the wind rocked the branches above them, the squirrel family finally drifted into exhausted, dreamless sleep. The journey had been long, too long. Henry's legs burned with exhaustion as he climbed the last stretch of branches, the weight of his family's fear pressing on him like a storm cloud. Linda was right behind him, her breath steady but weary. The little ones, Sandy, Lindsey, and Tyler, were quieter than usual, their fur damp with sweat, their tiny bodies worn from the countless dangers they had faced. And then they saw it. The forest opened before them like a dream, bathed in the soft golden light of the setting sun. The trees here stood tall and proud, their bark rich and unscarred by sickness. Their leaves shimmered in the fading light, whispering in the gentle breeze, strong, untouched, safe. The air smelled fresh and earthy, free from the damp rot of the fungus they had left behind. The ground was thick with fallen acorns, so plentiful they tumbled over one another in little golden mounds. The branches stretched wide and sturdy, as if welcoming them home. For the first time in what felt like forever, Henry let out a slow breath. "This," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "This is it." Linda stepped forward, pressing a paw against the bark of the nearest tree. It was firm beneath her touch, alive with strength. She turned to Henry, eyes glistening. "It's perfect." Tyler let out a delighted squeak, bounding into the nearest pile of acorns. "Look at this, we'll never go hungry again." He tossed an acorn in the air and caught it in his mouth, grinning. Sandy ran her paw along the smooth bark of a young oak. "It smells clean," she murmured. Like home." Lindsey stood frozen in place, staring up at the towering canopy. "No more running," she whispered. "No more." "Hiding?" Henry knelt beside her, his heart aching at the way she trembled, still braced for danger. He wrapped his tail around her small shoulders. "No more running," he promised. "We're safe now." One by one they chose their trees, each one strong, each one waiting for them. Henry climbed high into the branches of a sturdy oak and scouted the land, finally letting his guard down. Neighbors, new faces, unfamiliar but kind, watched them curiously from the shadows. A family of squirrels peeked from a nearby nest, a mother and her young ones. A pair of birds perched on a thick limb, their feathers ruffling in the breeze. A badger lumbered from his burrow, giving them a slow, knowing nod. And then, one by one, they stepped forward. "Newcomers, eh?" said an elderly squirrel, his fur silver with age. "Well, you made it just in time. Winter's coming." Linda dipped her head respectfully. "We've traveled a long way." The elder chuckled. "Most good things require a long journey." He gestured to the trees. "This forest is strong. You'll like it here." A weight lifted from Henry's chest. This wasn't just a place to stay, it was a place to belong. That night the family curled up together in the hollow of their new home, their fur brushing as they breathed in sync. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but this time, it carried no warnings, no danger, only the lullaby of rustling leaves. Sandy sighed contentedly. "I was scared, but we made it." Lindsey, for the first time in days, closed her eyes without fear. "We did." Tyler, half asleep, murmured, "Best adventure ever." Henry wrapped his tail around them all and met Linda's gaze. No words were needed. They had lost a home, but they had found another. And more than anything, they had found each other. The night was gentle, the sky a deep shade of indigo, painted with stars that shimmered like tiny lanterns. A cool breeze whispered through the trees, rustling the leaves in a soothing song. The forest, though unfamiliar just days ago, now hummed with life, a peaceful, steady rhythm that welcomed all who listened. Henry stood on the highest branch of their new home, looking out over the vast canopy. The moonlight bathed the treetops in silver, turning the leaves into shimmering waves. He breathed deeply, the crisp air filling his lungs. They had made it. His heart ached just a little for the home they had left behind, the nest where Sandy, Lindsey, and Tyler had taken their first wobbly steps, the branches where he and Linda had spent countless nights watching fireflies flicker like tiny stars. The old oak had been their world, their comfort. But comfort was not always safe. If they had stayed, they would have watched their home wither around them, felt their world shrink, bit by bit, until there was nothing left. Instead, they had dared to step into the unknown. They had risked fear to find something better. And they had. Henry turned, glancing down at his family, curled together in the soft hollow of their new tree. Lindsey, the timid one, had been the most afraid, but tonight she was tucked beside her mother, her tiny paws relaxed, her breathing steady. She wasn't trembling anymore. Sandy had been their voice of reason, the one who asked the hard questions, the one who helped them face the truth. Now she lay close to her father's side, her tail curled over her nose, her worries finally set to rest. And Tyler. Brave, wild-hearted Tyler, who had seen the world as one great adventure, now lay in a pile of acorns, dreaming of new journeys to come. Linda stirred, her warm brown eyes finding Henry's in the moonlight. No words were needed. They had lost a home, but they had built another. They had lost familiarity, but they had gained wisdom. They had left behind everything they knew, but they had never been alone. Henry sighed, feeling a warmth settle in his chest. The journey had been long, frightening at times, but without it, they would never have found this place. These strong trees, these new friends, this new beginning. Sometimes we have to leave our comfort zone to find something better. Change can be scary, but it can also be beautiful. As the wind rocked the branches and the stars blinked lazily overhead, Henry climbed down, nestled into the warmth of his family, and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly safe. And under the watchful glow of the moon, the squirrel family slept, at peace in their new home.